Hello everyone, today I'm going to show you how to turn a Raspberry Pi into a video playout device. Here I set the operating system for my Raspberry Pi. I'm using the full version of Raspbian. The main reason being that a lot of the stuff that we need is going to be automatically installed for us. This part takes a little while, at least it did for me. I've sped the footage up here. But essentially what we're going to do is we're going to use VLC, which is installed by default. We're going to use Python, which is installed by default. And we're going to set up our Raspberry Pi so that when it boots up, it's going to automatically play a video for us. I'm actually going to take this one step further. I'm going to use a USB video game controller. And I'm going to set it up so that when a specific button is pressed, it will automatically restart the video. And when another button on the controller is pressed, it will do a safe shutdown of the Raspberry Pi. So you could use this for a number of things. In this example, I'm actually using some footage of one of my friends climbing. We can assume that maybe there's a climbing gym. They want to have a video that's repeatedly playing. If you need something with a little bit more control, maybe you want to be able to loop output, you want to include it as part of a video mixing system like a Blackmagic, you want to use something like a HyperDeck, but this is a nice, cheap, and easy way of doing this. I'm using a Raspberry Pi 3B for this. I believe a Raspberry Pi 3 would be sufficient as well, although one thing I will explain is you probably need to audition the video that you are setting up. Mainly because if you use a video that's too large, I have had this crash during setup before, and in that situation I've had to completely wipe the micro SD card and start over again. Now that we're booted into the desktop, what I'm doing is I'm actually going to set a couple of the different system settings here. Change the country, the location. The time isn't vital, although for a different project, which you'll see coming up, it is important that you make sure that the time is accurate and correct. I'm pulling over the climbing video from my USB drive here, and I'm also going to turn off Bluetooth. We don't need to have that on. I'm going to mute the volume because in this particular situation I wasn't going to use it. I'm also going to set up Wi-Fi for setting this up and installing some software. If I was going to be taking this and deploying it, whether it be with a client or I'm going to use it on a set for part of a show, I would probably remove the Wi-Fi on here as well, or at least disable it. It can be easily changed when you're back at a studio or at home setting something up and making changes to the device. The final thing I'm doing here is I'm going to update some of the system settings. Personally, I prefer to take the splash screen off when we're doing setup. If there's any error message, I can kind of see what's going on there. I also set the video mode to 1080p, 60 frames a second. This is important for me because when I use this in my video switcher, I use 1080p, 60 frames a second as my standard. I do a lot of sport when I record, and so I have to have that higher frame rate. So I'm setting that so that it'll automatically boot up with that. Now that we've done all of this, we'll tell it to restart the system. And here we go. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open the terminal, and you may not need to do this, but in this particular situation for my particular network, I actually need to change the name server. Otherwise it will not pick up some of the stuff I'm going to ask it to do. I'm just going to use the standard Google DNS here. Okay, and then let's get started with our instructions. So as I mentioned, by using the full version of the Raspbian, a lot of the software we're going to need to use is already installed. So the first thing we are going to install is Pinepert. this is basically a module part of Python that we can use to get access to mouse events and keyboard events, and it's what we're going to use to listen for the escape key being pressed, and we're going to then tell the Raspberry Pi that it will shut down once it's done that. And then for the other key commands that we're going to set up, we're going to install Q Joypad. So if you're new to using Linux or Raspberry Pis or anything with a kind of command line software like this, very straightforward. This is essentially installing the software. When we use sudo, it's super user do. It's telling the computer that you will do this. I have given you the permission to do so. You don't have to authenticate. And then we use apt-get to tell it to go and get the software, install it, and then we tell it QJoypad is the software that we want. Now what we've done here is we've opened the video that we want to play in VLC. You'll notice it's black, and when it's full screen it will play correctly. The reason I'm opening it now, I'm turning off on-screen display, I'm turning off subtitles, media showing, all that kind of stuff, just to get a clean output. But the reason that it's important we do this is that little box that popped up asking for permission and access to the network. If you do not set that up properly and then we complete this, it's actually going to hard crash the Pi when it starts up and tries to boot the video. So we'll make a new directory in the home and Pi folder. We'll call it scripts, and then we'll do sudo user again, nano, this is the text editor, and we're going to go back into that folder and we're going to tell it shutdown.py. This is a blank file, it doesn't exist yet. We're going to write it right now. This is the Python script that is going to listen for and execute that shutdown command with the escape key. So really quickly, we're going to import OS, and we're going to bring in from pineput.keyboard, and we're going to have, we're going to import key and listener. The reason we import OS is it gives us access to operating system controls, which is what is important for us. So the first thing we're going to do is define on_press, and we're going to tell it that when a key is pressed, I want it to print out to the console, and when we use terminal to run the command, you'll see what this does. I want it to print out the key press. So just tell me which key was pressed. The reason we're going to do this is when we set up QJoypad in a moment, we actually have a weird bug with it where it's supposed to show you the key that you're pressing, the button that you're pressing on the controller itself, and it doesn't, so we have to do a little bit of trial and error to set up which are the right keys. The next part of our code here is going to define on_release, so when you let go of the key, and what we're going to tell it is if that key is the escape key, equals means it is, then os.system, and we can pass it a command, and we're going to say super user do shutdown -h means it can kind of go through its standard shutdown procedure, it doesn't just turn itself off, and then now it tells it no matter what it's doing, if you're already running something, in which case our place it will be running a video, perform the shutdown anyway. Return true means that it will basically continue to run looking for that key after each key has been pressed. If we return false, then it would tell us what the first key is that we've pressed, and then it would automatically stop running the Python script. Final thing we'll put on here is just a little bit of code to tell it to take the listener, which is listening to what the keyboard presses are, and start passing the information into the code. It's pretty important this here. The other thing to keep in mind is the indentation on your code here is important, and if it's not correct, it will not be able to read it properly. Press Ctrl and X, and then we press Y for yes, and that is going to let us save it. And now you can see as I type on the keyboard, the correct keys come up. Perfect. That's our Python script written. Now for the trial and error, we're going to go into Q joypad. It'll pop up in our menu bar here. And when it turns up, we have to find the right keys. I already know that the button 5 is what I want to use for escape. So I'll press escape here. And button 2 is what I'm going to use for next. And that is the N key. I will then press update. I'm going to name this. I'm going to name it video. And we'll say OK. You need to remember what you are naming this, because when we set our script to start the Raspberry Pi and start Q joypad automatically, we need to tell it which profile it is going to be loading. So now we go back into terminal. We go back into our text editor. We're going to actually edit a file that exists already. So here we go into the folder etc xdg lxsession lxde-pi, and the file is called autostart. We have a couple of things in here already. Loads our desktop environment, takes away the screensaver on boot, all that kind of stuff. We're going to tell it, first of all, I want you to run VLC. I want you to run this file. This is just the one file I've got on my desktop here. You can actually specify several files in a row if you want to set up a playlist. Or if you go into the GUI and you make a playlist, you can save it as an M3U file and call that the same way. -- loop tells it to loop that video. -- full screen tells it to play that video in full screen. Then we'll tell it to play Q joypad, and video is that file that we just set up. The final thing we're going to do is say superuser do -3. We'll go into that folder, go into that shutdown.py file. My W key is a little bit sticky, as you can see there. And tell it to run that Python file on start, and then that will run in the background indefinitely. So now we're going to reboot, give it a quick second, and then this is how everything should run from now on when this Raspberry Pi is plugged into a HDMI device. And you don't need to have your keyboard and your mouse connected at this point. You don't even need to have the controller connected, but I believe with this particular USB controller I'm using, if it's not connected on boot, it won't see it. Just a weird little quirk that it's got here. But here you can see it's loading up. The desktop environment is loading. There's our mouse, there's our desktop picture. And as it loads the GUI, you see it goes straight into this climbing video. Automatically plays full screen. And when we press the button on the controller for next, what it's going to do is it's going to restart that video. Automatically restarts it. I don't know if there's a way to get rid of that little window effect as it kind of changes the video from one to another. But if you're using this as part of production, you just need to be able to skip to your next video. It should be fine. And then we press that other button at the end there, and it does the safe shutdown, and our Pi is now completely turned off. So this is how to use a Raspberry Pi as a video playout device, whether you're connecting that to a multi-view, whether you're using it to display a video slideshow at a wedding, a menu at a restaurant. If you want to, we've got a business, you want to have your video kind of showing off in the background on a loop, or even an event with a logo, this is how you can do it. I hope that was useful. I'm going to have another video coming up with a piece of software I've written for a segment timer that could be used in theater and live events, using a similar kind of setup. So if you want to kind of see that, I should have that up hopefully in a week. We're at the very latest on this same channel. Beyond that, check out my website. It is checkoutallen.online, and stay safe.